Welcome to another episode of Talk FS. Today I'm joined by an inspiring guest, Jacqueline Lockie, founder of Lockie Consultants. Jacqueline started off her career as a financial advisor and quickly noticed a gap in the process of becoming an advisor. Now she is dedicated to supporting financial professionals by creating an inspiring and innovative new way of learning that helps them succeed and grow in their careers. In today's episode, we'll be exploring why critical thinking is needed within financial services, how businesses can improve their support and development to the next generation, and why chartered might not always be the main goal in the immediate term. Jackie, thank you for joining me today and welcome to the podcast.
My pleasure. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
That's okay. So that's a very open question, isn't it? Why critical thinking is needed in financial services.
Yeah.
Should we start there?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. So in your perspective, why do you think critical thinking is needed within financial services?
So I think critical thinking is one of those skills that we have to learn. We all have the ability to think critically, but humans are inherently lazy. And if we can see patterns, if we can see shortcuts, then we tend to disengage and kind of put our driving brain, if you like, into idle mode and just jump to those conclusions. And the thing is that in financial services, you're dealing with people on a daily basis. You're dealing with the team around you. You're dealing with clients on a daily basis for the majority of people out there. And so it's really important to make sure that we are using our critical thinking brain to get the best outcome for those clients, rather than using our kind of lazy brain to impose patterns or perhaps to be swayed by previous experiences that we've had perhaps with other clients who are in a similar but slightly different situation. And we kind of we charge in on our white horse and go, oh yes, I know the answer. And then we just kind of, again, we put our brain in that idling mode rather than actually leaning in, building a relationship with the client and really getting to the bottom of why they're there, why they've come to you. Is it something straightforward or is it something, a bit more complicated? Because, over the years, many years that I've been in the financial services world now, I've seen that clients will come saying things like, I'm a bit worried about my pension, or, I don't know if I'm fed up on my job. I don't know if I've got enough money to retire. And actually, that is the tip of the iceberg of real concerns that they have. And there's a whole raft of other nuances and things that have happened to them over the years, things that you might not be worried about if you were in their situation, but because of their own experiences, they might have these underlying other concerns. So we're not just taking things at face value, but we're using our critical thinking brain to really get to the bottom of why the client's there and to help them make the best of their finances for their own financial futures. So it's a tricky dilemma because we all love to think that we have a great critical thinking brain and, we listen to people. I mean, we're in the business of listening to people, for goodness sake. So yeah, Jackie, move on, and I get that quite a lot as well. But if you challenge yourself and really say to yourself, are you really? What did the client really say? The nuances down to those fine details, then quite a lot of the time we actually miss them ourselves.
So do you think there's ways that someone could almost test themselves as to are they thinking critically enough then?
Yes, there are some great ways. There are some quite funny ways as well that you can test yourself. One of my favorite ways is maybe to do role plays. And again, doing role plays are very kind of out of fashion at the moment. When I became an advisor back in the early 1990s, role plays were compulsory as a compulsory requirement of being signed off as a financial advisor in those days. So you kind of had to get over yourself basically and get on with it. But we do have, I don't know whether it's kind of been accelerated by lockdown, but there is this kind of reticence to engage with people and to put yourself out there, to learn more about yourself, to grow personally. But in doing that, you're exposing yourself to those negative connotations and potential downsides in a situation. And I think I see lots of younger people coming through who kind of really committed to giving financial advice and working in the financial services profession. But when I say to them, can you phone that client, or just just give that chap a ring, and they go, oh no, can't do that. I will email them, or I'll text them or WhatsApp them, but they won't actually, they're very resistant to engaging. So some of the things that you can do is you can do some role plays, but also if you're in real client meetings, you have to ask the client's permission. But if you can, record the meeting, but without the sound.
Okay.
And watch it back afterwards and watch the body language. So as you're having this conversation with a client, or maybe you've got, other financial professionals in the room with you, doesn't really matter. Watch all the different people's body language in the room. Who's leaning in, who's leaning out, who's folding their arms, who's looking at the ceiling, who's counting the dots on the carpet. What are you doing? Are you thumbing through a book ready to answer the next technical question? Are you too consumed writing client notes of the meeting that you're not actually listening, and you're listening only to write it, but you're not actually listening to understand what's going on? So those kinds of things you can do can be really positive. And again, you're setting yourself up for potentially for criticism, to learn more about yourself and develop your skills along the way. But you've really got to take that attitude of just rolling your sleeves up and just, kind of throwing yourself in to talking to people and asking their opinions, and knowing that some of the time you're going to like what they hear, and some of the time it's not going to be so great, but they're offering you feedback to help you improve, and you need to accept the feedback in the way that it's meant to be delivered.
Yeah, most definitely. That is an interesting task. I must do that at some point. Although it seems odd, I almost don't want to know the results of it. And that's then the blinkered approach we all take sometimes, isn't it? But
Yes.
like you said,
Yes.
we don't grow if we constantly don't ask the questions we don't want to know the answers to. That's not a healthy place, is it?
No. And actually, a lot of the time you think that you're standing still, but actually in reality, you're going backwards, because the people, if you were going to apply for a job, for example, the people around you who you don't know exist, who are also applying for that same job, they might be doing some of these things, and they might be, putting themselves out there. I've got young people who've contacted me who are just on the outskirts of the profession and kind of want to get their sleeves up and more involved in giving advice to clients. And they've still contacted me and said, look, Jackie, I know that I'm miles off, doing courses with you and everything, but do you have any recommendations for the, best books to read? What could I do to help myself? And so there are people out there, you have competitors out there who are making those strides forward, who aren't afraid to contact somebody directly and just ask for 30 minutes of feedback or a conversation, how to get into the profession, what else could they be doing? And all of those little things, they all add up, and they all push the playing field down into your direction, which is what you want essentially when you're applying for a job at the end of the day, isn't it? You just want to tip the scales in your favor just very slightly so you can get your foot in the door.
Yeah, most definitely. Whether you're at the start of your career, middle of your career, or even end of your career, you always want to put things in your favor, don't you? And so, yeah, that those intangible elements that ultimately is, when the person sat opposite the table is deciding who to give the job to, it's sometimes just that gut feel, isn't it?
Yes.
That makes the difference. And well, if there's only one job, there's only one winner, and the rest are, no one remembers second place, sadly.
No, no. And, even just a few months ago, well, nearly this time last year, about 10 months or so ago, I put a job on LinkedIn, and I put very specific criteria of the sort of person I was looking for. Within an hour, I had to take the job advert down because more than 50 people had applied for the job. And I think 30 out of the 50 people clearly didn't meet the criteria. And one of the criteria was that they had to be in the UK. And that's because of my IT company and all the VPN links and all the issues that they have with people around the world. And I said, please don't apply if you're outside the UK, because you have to physically be somewhere. It doesn't matter where in the UK, but you have to physically be in the UK. And yet still 30 out of 50 people were in everywhere other country in the world apart from in the UK. So, all you're doing is annoying people like that. if you've got to be coherent about, what are the component requirements of a job, but also, you've got to be a little bit flexible. So you might not know, like I'm going to we get onto in a minute, but you might not have all the exams, for example, but you might be working towards becoming chartered, or having more advanced exams. So in those situations, most employers that I come across, they will say, we can teach the technical stuff. We can just give you a workbook. We can send you on a course. You eat the workbook, metaphorically speaking, not literally. And then you sit the exam, you pass it, and off you go on to the next one. What they can't teach is your attitude, your can-do attitude, your deep thinking, your ability to self-reflect and say, okay, what could I have done differently in a meeting? How did I feel that I come across? Because how we perceive ourselves is very different to how people perceive us. And, certainly when I was younger, I was a paraplanner and I was very technical. I loved maths and stuff like that. So I was the proverbial walking library book. And so I saw myself that way, but clients didn't see me that way. And my bosses didn't see me that way. And then be like, Jackie, come into the meeting. And I'd be like, oh, why? I was too frightened to go because the client, I thought I would frighten the clients or I'd bamboozle them with my technical knowledge. Actually, it turned out that I had a skill that I didn't realize I had that could explain technical information in very simple terms. But until I actually went into that meeting, I didn't know that I possessed that kind of skill. And so sometimes we're developing skills all of the time. And kind of when you check in with yourself, you're kind of like, well, I can choose to do that again. And if you get positive feedback, you go, okay, yeah, that I felt a little bit uncomfortable doing that maybe, but actually it's had a really positive outcome. And so how I see myself is actually different to how people see me. So maybe I kind of need to rein in a little bit of self-doubt there and carry on doing those positive things.
That's such a valid point, isn't it? Because at the start of our conversation, you mentioned about critical thinking and not riding in with the solution when you just hear one element of it. And so it is that critical thinking when you've got a client in front of you or a problem. It doesn't have to necessarily be a client; it could be a problem. Don't just use what you learned last week, the week before, last year, or whatever, and say, "Oh, I did that, so it must be this." So it's the critical thinking to ask more questions there. But also what you're saying is the critical thinking on yourself when you're in those situations of how did I handle that? Could I do things differently? And I was speaking to Peter McGann, who's did an episode with early this year, yesterday, funny enough. And he said a very interesting question that stuck with me. And he said, what would I do if I was 10% braver? And that, it's that critical thinking of yourself and your actions and that long development as well for your personal element there of whether it's braver, whether it's pushing yourself, whether it's learning from the situation. The critical thinking comes into that element so much as well, which I guess in your role of training people, you must see so often that so many people come wanting to learn, but they come away with so much more than just the qualification based theoretical knowledge. They come away with the behavioral and the confidence to apply it and push themselves. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. I found that a lot of people, particularly people who charge through the exams quite quickly, that they don't pause and, self-reflect, but also try and apply that knowledge in different situations with different problems, as you mentioned there. And then what tends to happen is we forget stuff. We're only human. We forget it. It kind of drains out of one ear while we're trying to learn something else in the other ear. And it means then that we're not as effective as we could be. And therefore, that means then that we're perhaps not as brave as we could be because we lack that confidence because we've forgotten a little bit of information, or you might remember a snippet and then you'd kind of think, oh, hang on a minute, I can't remember all of it off the top of my head. And, it's okay that in a meeting, you might think, is the client really asking me to tell me some sort of technical information about a particular issue? The answer is actually no. It's about how you set the expectations of the client asking those kinds of questions and managing their expectations so that you don't have to remember absolutely everything about everything. You can go away, look it up, say, that's a really great question. I don't want to give you incorrect information. Can you just give me 24 hours to go away and look it up and I'll come straight back to you? In that situation, the client's experience is managed and their expectations are set. You just have to make sure, 100% sure, that you do respond within 24 hours, which again is down to accepting the responsibility yourself, rather than just kind of going, yeah, whatever, somebody else will pick that up. If you're saying it, it is your responsibility to make sure that happens. And whether that happens to be somebody else who replies on your behalf or not, or whether you reply yourself, if you say that something's going to happen, you need to make really sure that it does happen. So I think, yes, I like that, being 10% braver, but I would qualify that between being braver, being more confident. And people coming through the course, I find that initially lots of people, and I think this is part of the issue with the racing through exams, is that you tend to be, when you're doing an exam in financial services, you're essentially examined on what you've read in the workbook, and you're not examined on all of the other peripheral information, which actually is really important, that will fall alongside and around those subject areas in that workbook. But on a day-to-day basis, you're going to come across bits of both that straddle both what you've learned in the workbook and these other areas that actually you haven't done any revision for, because you were just focused on passing that particular exam. And so you can come unstuck, because when you talk to a client, again, if you're not engaged in your critical thinking brain and you're trying to be a little bit braver and a little bit more confident, that can actually undermine the confidence, because essentially you've been spoon feeding yourself from that workbook and you haven't kind of, popped your nose over the parapet and, looked at broader reading around that subject area and thought to yourself, okay, a little bit more self-reflection. Is there anything else? This can't be, the only book on this subject. What's somebody else's view on the same sort of situation, of particular technical information, whatever it might be, client situation, and, ask somebody else about it. Is there anything else, some nuances perhaps that you haven't read about that somebody else learned, many years ago, perhaps, that could be brought to bear to solve a particular problem. So, but yeah, I definitely like being, 10% braver, but being braver comes with an attitude, and it's like a muscle. That critical thinking, it is a muscle. You wouldn't go to the gym once. I remember quite a famous cyclist who was a friend of mine. He said to me when I was cycling with him in Mallorca, I think he won bronze medal at the 88 Commonwealth Games. And he said to me, Jackie, if you wanted to lift 1,000 kilograms, you wouldn't just swan on into the gym and pick it up, would you? And I said, no. And he said, why not? And I said, because I'd probably pull every muscle in my entire body and wouldn't be able to walk for months. And he was like, exactly. He said, well, what would you do? You'd go in and you'd lift 10. You'd get used to lifting 10. Then you'd go in and you lift 15 and you carry on. And eventually you probably get to 1,000 kilograms, like whatever. So, and the principle is the same. It's about taking those small steps, using your critical thinking brain, flexing that muscle, practicing flexing that muscle, asking those extra questions, bit of self-reflection, but also seeking feedback from other people. How did I do? What do they think I could have done differently? And, some of the time, because people can be quite selfish. And I found, particularly in my younger days, some people like to keep you in a particular pocket. Mm-hmm. And they don't always like to support people. So sometimes when you ask for feedback from people, they might say, oh, yes, Jackie, but, you were really good at that bit, but, pretty rubbish at that bit. And you go, oh, thanks very much. I'll just go, have a cry in my cup of soup or something at lunchtime. And so sometimes you have to take it on the chin. But, where are they coming from when they're trying to give you the feedback? Are they giving honest feedback? Is it the feedback in a structured fashion? Or are they just having a go at you, because you've rubbed them up the wrong way or something like that? So you then have to have the confidence to be able to go, yeah, well, I'll take the feedback on board, but sometimes I don't have to listen to the feedback if basically you're just having a bit of a rant at me. But, try and stand back and think, what's the essence of what that person is trying to convey to you? And sometimes people, not many of us actually have been trained how to deliver feedback to people. And that's a skill in itself, isn't it, Ryan? You just kind of go, yeah, well, that's pretty good. Yeah, well done, Ryan. And you just go, what exactly? What was pretty good? And off they go, they're gone, and you think, yeah, what on earth happened there? So, I think that there is some learning to do about how to give feedback. And when you're asked to give feedback, what's the structure that you're going to follow when you give feedback to other people that you're trying to support as well?
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think what I'm picking up from what you're saying there, particularly, is the accountability element, that as people learn and take on more responsibilities naturally through their roles, is make sure you don't lose that accountability element, because that's so important. But also that patience, and we touched on it very briefly in the intro about not having the rush to get chartered, not the rush to get the exams on your belt. And as you've been saying, is make sure each time you take a new collection of knowledge on board, you really are digesting it, understanding it, trying to use it in practice, and so having that patience. And that's got to be hard for those who are in situations who are very aspirational, want to progress on, got goals in place, and me and you are saying be patient. Don't go too quickly. And then there's sadly too many businesses out there, exactly like you said, who will happily pigeonhole someone and say, "Oh, yeah, yes, you're best suited to this role for the foreseeable because it works for them and that company." So it's hard for us to say, be patient, but progress. And then if they're in that situation, they're getting the feedback, how wonderful they are at their job, but you're not too good to progress. It's very mixed messages, isn't it? So it is so important you have the correct mentor, the correct manager in place who is able to facilitate that growth at a healthy pace. And I think that again comes back to the critical thinking, doesn't it? That you've been saying there, is ask for the feedback, but analyze the feedback as well. Is there a vested interest in them diminishing your ability to progress? Because I don't know. I see it very often that sadly someone's held in that role because they struggle to replace them if they were to be promoted. Well, you do need to ask yourself that, don't you?
Yes.
And put maybe that question back and say, well, do you think I've got capability? What do I need to do to be able to progress? And it's those extra questions that can really unlock the difference and hopefully shed some light on, are they just saying it because it's convenient for
Yes.
them?
And actually, there are a few things to think about there. So I've been in exactly that situation, Ryan, where I've been pigeonholed in a job and a glass ceiling has been put on me because I was great at my job and I loved it. But I knew that my technical skills were advancing all the time, but my interpersonal skills, I just felt that there was this imbalance as I was working away. The people I worked with in the office, they had high praise for all the plans and everything that I turned out, but somebody once said, I heard them say to a client about me, well, we don't let Jackie out, she has to works in a dark room with no windows, ha, ha, ha. And you just think, yeah, thanks very much. And because of that personality that I thought I had, again, I was letting people pigeonhole me because I hadn't explored those other areas. I hadn't had the opportunity, but I could feel hand on heart. I knew honestly that I had more skills and I just needed the opportunity to flex those skills in a safe environment. And like you say, sometimes you can only go so far in some jobs and then something will happen in a situation like mine where you just think, okay, I would like to progress and learn some of the skills to put my other skills to the test a little bit, not just be known as the kind of technical library book department. And if that's not for me in this job, then, maybe that's when I need to go elsewhere. But in the meantime, are there things that you can do yourself to start to progress yourself? So, for example, are there behavioral finance books that you can read. People like Morgan Housel's, or George Kinder, The 7 Stages of Money Maturity. Books like that are a fascinating read, one, but actually they're a really good read, and they're quite informative in that you can use those principles in that book to apply to yourself. And you can start to have a feel for, actually, I do have some of what we famously used to call soft skills. Maybe I have some gaps in my soft skills. Maybe that's because I am engaging my critical thinking brain a bit more now. I'm flexing my muscle. But now I've kind of outgrown the situation that I'm in, and I need to find another job or another role where I can start to expand into that. And I think, the other thing to mention is that having a mentor, it's great to have a mentor in the workplace. But if you don't have a mentor in the workplace, find somebody outside the workplace. It can be a professional in any walk of life, because when you're managing people, the similar principles apply, whether you're, running a factory. I used to have a client who ran a factory who manufactured gloves, ladies' gloves. And also I ran a team when I worked for the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment. But the management skills, the style might be a little bit different, but the management skills and requirements of a manager in both of those situations are pretty similar. And so if you're looking for a mentor, then it doesn't have to be inside the workplace that you're currently working. If you are able to go to networking events, for example, and meet other people that are in a similar profession, you might find that you click with other people from different firms. And you're not talking to them going, right, I'm just going to single them out and sit on them until they give me a job. But you're building a relationship with them and see if they could mentor you. The professional bodies out there, the financial services professional bodies, often have mentorship that's free as well. So you might have a, wealth manager or an investment manager that would be prepared to mentor you as well. So don't just look inside the firm and think, oh gosh, I'm not, maybe you're a little bit apprehensive about, asking a particular person who you think might be a great fit. Again, it's about, letting yourself be, molded by other people in the profession and even outside of the profession to mentor you along the way. And sometimes those people who are outside the profession can look at what's going on and go, yeah, it's not you, it's them. Or, actually, Jackie, it is you this time. So, rein your neck in or whatever it might be.
Yeah, having that external source can be really beneficial. And they'll be asking some simple questions sometimes, like, why do you do stuff like that? But when everyone's in the firm, we just go, well, we do it that way. But having someone go, why do you? And then sometimes you can't actually even provide the answer yourself to it.
No. Yes. You're in trouble when you say, well, we've always done it that way. That's not a reason. I've used that one in the past. Doesn't work. I give you that one for nothing.
Yeah. If you can back it up, though, that you've tried others and that one worked, then fair enough. I am interested. You mentioned earlier on your tip for testing your critical thinking. Recording a meeting. Recording meetings is the latest sort of one of the latest things to come out in the recent years with helping advanced technology, because then you can truly listen because your note taking is being done for you. Where else do you see technology that's coming in that is helping, but also actually, from the conversation we've had and thinking critical thinking in mind, is maybe masking some stuff there? Have you got anything you can shed the light on there?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting topic looking at technology, because in the last kind of 20 or so years, particularly in the financial services world, the software has advanced enormously. So you can buy and license off the shelf different software for financial plan clients, and it will do all the heavy lifting for you, and you have a nice little financial plan that basically fills in all bar the actual advice that you might give. So it does a huge amount of work and simplifies, the process completely. So it does mean that pieces of software like that can make us, again, a bit lazy, because we are not necessarily, we're concentrating on the information that's going into this bit of software, but we tend not to pay as much attention to the outputs of the software. And I know that the financial services regulator has published a report recently about the retirement income review for anybody who wants to look it up on the FCA website. And actually, it's quite fascinating to me. Some of these documents they put out are very dry, but this one is really interesting. And one of the things that they've pulled out of and highlighted in this report is they're stress testing and looking at the outputs, asking yourself, okay, is this reasonable? So, for example, if you are investing a client's portfolio and you're trying to find out when they run out of money, which assets are actually included in that projection? So things like the house that they live in, have you included their house and their cars and, their personal assets like jewelry and things like that, posh picture that they've got on the wall at home and things like that. Some people accidentally include those assets in that cash flow projection, which basically means that when they go, oh, you ran out of money at 87, that means you've got no house, no car, no jewelry, no painting. You basically got the clothes you're standing up in and that's your lot, matey. And it's, you're misleading clients by not looking through right to the end of a financial plan like that and just kind of going, hang on a minute. Again, applying that critical thinking brain. Okay, yes, I have paid a lot of attention to the information that went in a system like that. But what about what's coming out? What checks and balances do I need to do to ensure that what I'm showing a client, which then naturally leads on to the advice that is being given, whether it's by me or by somebody else, you need to make sure that it's robust. The outputs are robust rather than you have to pay as much attention to the outputs and using your critical thinking skills to just check that everything is as it should be. And I find that a lot of people don't pay much attention to that. And I think the other aspect is AI, definitely. I think AI is definitely making efficiencies in financial advice businesses, no doubt about it. I think AI is having a massive impact on the investment management world, simplifying the requirement for as many people as there currently are. There are people at, big investment houses who are being asked to either take redundancy or move jobs purely because the systems are so sophisticated now that the bits that don't need client interaction and that human touch, a lot of those aspects can be done by some sort of computer system or AI. And so it's the human interaction, which I think is going to be the future. And I would just say that I've been testing, as you know, Ryan, I've been testing ChatGPT with my own spreadsheets because somebody said to me the other day, Jackie, I don't need to pay for, all these proprietary software for when I'm giving advice to my clients. I just asked ChatGPT to do it for me. And I thought, right, I'll put it to the test myself. Let's see what it can do. Anyway, I ran it through its paces and it's not good. It is not up to the job, let's say. I gave it a quite a sophisticated spreadsheet and asked it to add in one more tax calculation for me. And it was selecting blank cells as references. And when I said, why have you done that? It said, good catch. Would you like me to do something different? And I was like, yeah, of course I would like you to do the right thing that I asked you to do. And so there are many aspects that AI is definitely having a positive impact on. But I think we do need to be a little bit careful, again, to engage our critical thinking brain and just say to ourselves, actually, are we paying more attention to what's going in than what's coming out? Because the only way we can keep AI in check to make sure it is actually running along the tram lines that we are setting it is to give it a sense check at the outputs end. And I know that I've seen some financial advice firms who they have a little AI, obviously with client permission, data protection and all of that needs to be considered, but they have an AI running in the background for client meetings. And then they go back and it does a transcription. And then they kind of go back and go, right, I'm, typing up my client notes or ready to put some information from the meeting into a client report. And I can't find what I thought was said in the meeting. And it's because the AI hasn't fully understood what were the nuances between those human interactions that was going on in that meeting. And it's essentially made up something and has put that in instead. And it hasn't flagged it as I guess logically you might think, says me with a logical brain, you might think the AI would kind of go, not sure about this. So this is a draft of what I think that particular part of the conversation was about. But no, it's confidence again. it's 10% confidence, but actually is getting the whole thing wrong for that particular part of the discussion. And then it kind of flips back to actually the bit it does understand, and then again transcribes that. So if you give it a cursory glance, you might find the bit at the start and the bit at the end kind of looks normal, and therefore the bit in the middle, de facto, must be okay. But actually, it's not necessarily the case. So I think AI is having an increasingly positive impact. But I think I'm not one. I've tested it as far as I can at the moment, and I'm not one to let it loose just yet.
Yeah, I agree. And it's advancing at such a pace. I think we all need to continue to sense check our own adoption levels and our interest level and engagement level with it, because it's moving at such a pace. And it, obviously with large language models, it's always learning. But as you say, if it's learning on incorrect information, the compound effect of that is not getting better.
Yes.
Obviously, there's hugely intelligent people behind the scenes powering it, and it's pulling from huge sources of information. So it's probably going to get cleverer, but yeah, just check. And also, as we've discussed, it's software's there to potentially assist, but the problems don't change. And I was having this conversation with someone earlier this week. Theoretically, you were fortunate enough to get a lovely lump sum, whether you play the lottery or had an inheritance or something. Would you really want to just chuck that into ChatGPT and say, where shall I invest this?
Yes, do it all for me.
Would you really want that to trust it? Or would you actually want to speak to someone who that is their career that they've studied for? They do it day in, day out. They have quite big consequences if they get it wrong regularly. So, I think everyone likes the idea of it, but also I think the problems are still there. People want that human element of,
yes,
okay, you've inherited this money or you've got this lump sum. What are your long-term goals with it? Would you happily just burn through it within a year and just, live in the Maldives for the next 12 months?
Blow the lot.
Blow the lot, and it doesn't matter. If that's the case, then go enjoy that. But
yes, and I went to the Financial Planning Institute in South Africa, their conference in Cape Town, probably about 6 years ago now, and they were talking about AI at the time. And there was an AI in South Africa that helped you save. And so you could have these little notional pots. So I'm saving for a new car, or I'm saving for a holiday, or whatever it might be. And it would kind of help segregate out, your monthly earnings, and it would plonk it notionally in these pots. But it was also sophisticated enough to look at what you were searching for using your phone. So it was looking at your searches. And let's say you set up a pot for going on holiday, going to the Maldives in a couple of years' time. You're browsing the internet for new cars. So you get to a level of savings in your pot for your holiday. And this app would say, we've noticed that you want a new car. And we found this Mercedes SLK, whatever it is, and it's the same amount as you have saved for your holiday. Would you like to buy it? Well, I nearly dropped through the floor, because that is basically saying, well, it's encouraging you to spend money that isn't necessarily for the right thing. I mean, you might decide that actually you need a car and therefore you're going to ditch the holiday, but it is positively encouraging you down a different route. Not because it's had a conversation with you about what you want out of life, but just looking at your search patterns on the internet, which you might be. I mean, if you looked at my search patterns, it would be completely different, because my mum is disabled. And so I do quite a lot of internet searches for her. And so if you looked at my search patterns, you would think that, I'm housebound or something like that. So it isn't necessarily reading the right information that is going to help you get where you want to go. And just like you said, you get your £10,000. It could invest it for you and also spend it for you, obviously. But also it lacks that conversation of exactly what you said, Ryan. What are your long-term goals? What do you want it to do for you? Because money isn't money for money's sake. Money is a driver that gets you where you want to go. So where do you want to go? Now, maybe the first time you inherit some money like that, you kind of think to yourself, well, I don't know what I don't know. So maybe I just kind of, I don't know, just shove it away somewhere and worry about any of that later. But actually, it's worth starting to think, and again, flexing our critical thinking brain. Do you want to be in this job all of your life? Do you have other aspirations of things that you love doing? Maybe things you volunteer at the moment. Are there other people and other skills that you're acquiring, on the periphery of the job you're doing now that you seem to be doing by accident, but you love it? Is there a budding entrepreneur, and maybe you want to start your own business, as thousands and thousands of people have done in the UK? All of those aspects, you could use that money in so many different avenues, but it's about, rather than just investing it for, oh, well, I don't know enough, think about what you want to do yourself, do a little bit of blue sky thinking and see where it gets you. And maybe that money could be used to start taking those early steps towards ultimately what your lifelong dreams might be.
Fantastic. And just before we wrap up today's episode, I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you today. We've touched on a little bit throughout, but have you got any advice to the next generation, whether that's people who, are deciding their career, or maybe people changing careers, the entrance into the financial planning profession? Have you got any advice for them to enhance their ability to find the right position and progress more than anything, really?
Yes, lots. I've got a list, as you know. I've always got a list somewhere. So the first thing I would do is get out there, network, even if it feels a bit difficult. I've been to so many conferences where I kind of say to my husband, oh, I don't really want to go, don't really feel like going. And actually I have a whale of a time when I get there. Put yourself out to meet other people, because people buy people in the financial planning profession. People buy people, clients are people, your people, clients buy you. So you will build confidence, you will build a network of people around you. So I think that would be my top tip. Don't think, oh, I could do it virtually, just because people need to see the whites of your eyes, to see you in person, to get more of a feel for your all-round personality. And then the next thing I would do is be a sponge. Somebody once said to me, Jackie has a brain like a sponge. And I think actually it stood me in really good stead over the years. Always be eager to learn something new, and think to yourself, that self-reflection that we've talked about throughout our session today is thinking through, okay, how can I use this? How can I use it to improve how I talk to people, how I approach a conversation, how I set out, if I want to change something in a business, how do I write a little one-page report? How do I approach it rather than just, firing from the hip? Have a structured way of approaching it. And then the third thing I would say is read more. Don't just listen to a podcast. I mean, podcasts are great, absolutely. And they will fill in a lot of blanks for you. But again, like our conversation today, it's just our opinion. We're just two people passing on our opinion. The world is full of lots of people passing on their opinion. And you have to be, it's a bit like mining for gold. You have to be able to sift those opinions out and find those little gold nuggets that are valuable to you. So listen to podcasts, read lots of different books about behavioral finance, about financial planning, about how markets work, about all sorts of different things. Because I think the future is going to be where that human interaction is going to be strongest. So enhance your skills, look to enhance those skills rather than charging off just to tick the boxes of passing exams. Your skills will stand you in better stead in the long run, because you can just plug those knowledge gaps as you go. So I think they would be my 3 tips for you.
Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to end today. Really appreciate your time and fantastic contributions. I know we've probably said it countless times, but if you take anything away from today's episode, it is just ask yourself to think that little bit more critically in whatever situation it is, because it's probably going to stand you in good stead. And even if it doesn't in that situation, as Jackie says, it flexes that muscle, and the more you do it, the better you'll be at it. So yeah, thank you very much. To our listeners, hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode. I certainly did. So please do subscribe so we can continue to deliver fantastic content to you.